Dan Blocker wasn't just a big guy. He also had a big heart as Hose on Bonanza. Off screen, he made a lot of people laugh and cry. Was a good father and husband, but in 1972, when he was only 43 years old, he died suddenly. His family is sad about his death. In Hollywood for many years, and his son Dirk, he didn't say anything about the pain he was in. He worked his whole life in silence, but now when he turns 67, he finally talks about telling his dad the truth about the death, and the loss. Fans didn't know this until now. Come with us as we find out what Dirk has finally said, why it's important that Dan Blocker's life story starts in he was born in the small Texas town of DeKalb. December 10, 1928, and he was born in the world weighing a huge 14 pounds, and he still holds the record, you know that. More than any other baby born in Bowie County, he stood out right away, and Dan's parents never really changed because of that. They were Mary, Arizona and Era Shack Blocker. When Dan was young, the family moved to in Texas. Ottonelle is about 40 miles from the Great Leech. Times were hard. Sadness had really hurt the family. Shack, who used to be a farmer, lost almost. He had everything, but he didn't give up. Opened a little grocery store in town. In the back of that store, a family lived. Young Dan helped by putting groceries in customers' cars and other odd jobs that his dad used to joke about. "I'll pay you to hire Dan," friends said. "He's making the store look bad with his size." Dan was big even when he was young. Also soft, kind, and quiet, that mix of it would have both strength and sweetness. Of who he had always been. At 13, Dan went to the Texas Military College. He was a linebacker for the football team there. He was already 6 feet 3 inches tall and weighed a football that weighed almost 300 pounds. Opened doors for he got a scholarship to go to Sul Ross State College to study and play baseball. Then he said in English that his size, and he got to college because he was strong, but what came next would be different. Everything during one of the school plays, the play Arsenic and Old Lace, that person had to be strong to move the heavy dolls that were used in the filming. Went well with the job, but then Ted asked him to play a small part. Brock, the crazy and funny nephew, and right then, something clicked. Dan loved being on stage and how it made him feel. Being in front of people, so he switched his major from English to he didn't go into theater after college. Pro football, even though he had the chance, he went with his heart instead. Played parts in summer theater repatriation shows and even had a small part on Broadway, and that was the beginning of King Lear's as an actor. But before he could not go any further, duty called. In the early 1950s, Dan was in the Army. Called up to serve in the U.S. Army during the Korean War. He trained at Fort Polk, Louisiana, and then was sent to Korea. He was a sergeant in the infantry. There was a time when he fought in battle and got hurt for being brave. He was given the Purple Heart. He also received a number of other awards, the United States Navy Service Medal and the Veterans of the United Nations Service Medal. He was changed by time and seeing war firsthand. Knew how to serve and protect. He came back in 1952 and was ready to begin a new life. That year he got married to Dolia Parker, who he had met while in college. They began a family that would grow to have 4 children, twin girls named Deborah Lee and Dana Lynn, and her 2 sons, David and Dirk. Dan, who had to take care of his family, he went back to school and earned a master's degree in theater. It wasn't enough to pay the bills, though. So Dan started working as a teacher. Taught drama and English at a high, went to school in Sonora, Texas, and then worked as a coach and 6th grade teacher in Carlsbad, New Mexico. He finally stayed in California and taught, but also moving towards something bigger. One thing he never forgot about Dan, where he came from, even though he was big, was known for being friendly. His classmates and co-workers remembered him as kind, humble, and calm, as that mix of strong and soft made people trust you. He was also perfect for the next part of his life, which was Dan and his wife Dulia on the road to Hollywood made a big choice and moved to Los L.A. The goal was to become an actress. Real shot, his childhood had made him who he was. To help out at his dad's for this, going from a grocery store to leading soldiers from the army to teaching in schools, Dan had I learned how to talk to people and that link showed up on the screen, but Dan worked hard and didn't get lucky right away. Different jobs while they looked for a he even worked as a bouncer and ran a rodeo when he was in college. Those years taught him to be calm and resilient and also got him ready for the road to Hollywood. When Dan Blocker moved his family to it wasn't to become famous that he went to California. Had other plans, and Dan wanted to keep going. Studying and had signed up at UCLA to get your PhD in theater arts at his job as a school teacher didn't change. He loved kids and they loved him as a teacher. Dan was nice and funny in the past. He was ready to help even though he was a man with a serious air about him. Gentle heart to help him grow. Dan also started trying out for this was in a few small TV roles in the middle of the 1950s. Westerns were the most watched show on TV, and he's big. Dan began, he fit right in with his voice and getting small roles on TV shows like Gunsmoke the Rifleman has Gun Will Go on Trip, and another role he plays often is Maverick. Was in the TV show See Marone City. He played Tiny Buttinger, but it wasn't a big part, but it kept him working. And paid attention to him while Dan still tried to teach and act. His family and school life were so busy that he had no big hopes of becoming famous. He just liked acting and getting to know people. Took what looked like small steps would soon become something much. He was bigger, but he didn't know it yet. That moment of truth came when one show ended, and a new chance came up. Dan's big break came in 1959. The part was offered to him by producer David Dorr. Eric Hose Cartwright on a new NBC show. There was a Western show called Bonanza, the story of a wealthy ranching family in Nevada. Dan played Hose, who was the middle son, was big and strong. That character would be kind-hearted Dan's career and make him well-known. A man named Dan once said that he based his "what you did" as Hose on a quote from Stephen Greal was a Quaker missionary, and we will only go this way once on earth if there's any way we can be kind, or let's do a good thing right now for we'll never go this way again, and he played the part just that way. He wasn't the smartest person in the family. He wasn't great with women either. He was often the one being tricked or people made fun of him, but his fans loved him the most, the reason being he had a huge heart. Kids also liked him, kind of like Hose, a big kid himself with a pure heart of love. Dan was on Bonanza for 415 episodes from 1959 until the year he died in 1972. That's more than 10 years of being in living rooms every Sunday night. He felt like a TV character more than anything else behind the scenes. Dan was like family. He was just as warm as the man he played. Became close with co-stars Michael Landon and Lauren Green. Were together. Spent long days making movies together, beginning at 7 a.m. and ending 5 days a week, around 9 p.m. They even hung out off-set. Dan was best man at Michael Landon's wedding to Lynn No, but even though Dan had a lot of filming to do, still had time to show up in a lot of those projects had big stars from Hollywood working with legends, and he got offers from Hollywood while Bonanza kept him. Dan was busy, but he still did other acting jobs. He was in a movie with Frank Sinatra in 1963 called Come Blow Your Horn. Is a funny movie with Five. After many years, in 1968, he acted with Sinatra again in Lady in Cement, where he played a scary and tough role personality that is very different from Sweet Hose. Dan also caught the attention of big directors. One of them was Stanley Kubrick, who to play him in Dr. Strangelove. The Dan was supposed to play Major T.J. King Kong, the soldier who rides an atomic bomb like a cowboy in one of the movie's best-known scenes, but Dan's agent turned down the script because they didn't like it in the end. The part went to Slim Pickens. Around that time, Dan was in a TV movie called Something for a Lonely Man, where he played John, a blacksmith Killebrew who shows settlers the way to California. The movie also had people in the cast like Susan Clark and Don Straw. Dan was in The Cockeyed in 1970. He played in the show Cowboys of Calico County. A shy man looking for love. Nanette Fabre was seeing his girlfriend, and there were also stars like Mickey Rooney and Jack Aleem, and he even made an appearance as a guest on the Flip Wilson, showing off his funny side. Director Robert Altman, who had worked with Dan on Bonanza, became good friends with him. After that, Altman wanted to cast Dan in The Goodbye as Roger Wade in Long Goodbye. Dan sadly passed away before the filming began. Sterling Hayden took on the part, and soon after, and the movie was made in honor of Dan's. Dan also became a part of my memory while I was acting in charge of the Bonanza Steakhouse. He made ads for a restaurant chain and going out in public as host to help getting the word out about the brand worked. A business deal, and it showed that Dan had a lot of star power. TV, but it didn't matter how big he got. Dan always remembered where he came from. We're no longer living in Texas in California, so they could be near, but the small town of O'Donnell, Texas thought about him all the time, as when Bonanza gave Dan a star, his old neighbors and friends, they couldn't believe the quiet boy thought about was now riding across there. They used to have TV screens on horses. Make fun of the fact that young Dan always had his nose in a book. Now he was a part of the TV shows that people loved the most, and he brought, even though he played a cowboy, being calm and thoughtful like he was for Dan as a child. Hose was all about being fair, being kind, and standing up for what was right, not just for Dan. Acting was a part of who he was. He was fair and cared about people. Never wanted to be flashy or well-known, he only wanted to do good work. And do many nice things for other people. Dan Blocker was like a gentle big guy who was strong. Not too well known, but humble about his time on. People knew him from Bonanza, but it was his heart on and off the screen that made him stand out as the man behind. When Dan Blocker moved to Hose Cartwright that year, in 1958, he planned to continue your studies at UCLA, but life had other plans. Thoughts about his time on stage in college had already made him want to act. Not something he only tried once, was something he felt interested in for years. Sooner after getting his degree from Solo State College, where he had played a Boston stock play in the summer that early, something that stuck with him. Dan was he married his college sweetheart and became a family man. On August 25 with sweetheart Gia Lee Parker 1952, they met while they were both students at Sol Ross, and they had 4 children together. 2 girls, twins Dana and Deborah, and David and Dirk, his sons, all grew up in a loving home, and later David, a famous actor, became a producer. And got an Emmy in 1998 for making Don King's Only in America. Dirk, on the other hand, did what his father did in his steps and became an actor. Dan, besides being religious, he was also a free. He was a Methodist and leaned left politically. Backed Democratic candidates such as Pat Eugene McCarthy and James B. Brown in 1966 and 1968. He finally sided with Hubert Humphrey in the race for president. He wasn't just he was a man with strong beliefs, and what the family thought. They had 2 homes in California, in Englewood, and one much bigger Hancock Park mansion in the style of a Tudor. In spite of his fame and wealth, Dan kept things. The actor Mitch Vogel, who played on the show Bonanza, Jamie Cartwright, once said Dan was the kind of person you could go to and that you have a beer with. What kind of man he really was, but his family and the way he cared for his kids shows that he loves them. Dan Blocker may have been a father at home, TV star, but at home he was just dad. He always found time for his kids. He told the Tampa Bay Times once that he was busy. Says, "We've got a pretty good crew." He was proud of that one line. Spent time with his kids and loved it. Dan would set up interviews with them and tell them that while he was the calm one being a parent, his wife Dulia was he was strict and believed in structure. For his kids, if one of ours gets hurt, isn't in bed and asleep by 8 p.m. his name is on a list for 1 week. That means the kid isn't who is a valid member of the 8 o'clock club. The kids chose to stay at the club. Not going to bed wasn't a problem. It was Dan's a simple but smart way to keeping the house running smoothly. Dan, he let his kids watch Bonanza, but he made sure they knew it was all believe that he told them it was just a job. But for them, seeing their dad as Hose one night, Cartwright felt very real while his daughter was watching the show. I saw a scene where Hose was hit by she freaked out because she thought her dad had really hurt. She ran to him and jumped into his lap and asked, "Do you feel all that? Sounds good, Daddy. May I get you an aspirin?" That moment showed how deeply his kids loved him, more than just as a dad, but as their hero. And while Dan at that moment, he should keep his work from home, told him that to his children he was more than just a TV man. He was there. It's a safe place for their Hose in real life. But on May 13, 1972, everything changed. 1972, Dan went to a hospital in Los Angeles for something that was supposed to be easy. No one was ready for gallbladder surgery. Anything could go wrong. He was 43 and healthy. And Bonanza was at the top of his game, still going strong, and fans looking forward to a new season, but no one saw what was going to happen. Dan got a blood clot in his lung as well. The name of the blood clot in the lungs, just like that, he was gone. The news shocked everyone. His wife, his 4 kids, and co-stars, and all the people who had they let him into their homes every week. Dan Blocker was no longer in the cast of Michael, was deeply affected by Bonanza. Landon is one of Dan's best friends. He later said that whenever he had to cry for a scene that made him think of Dan's, that was how close they were to death. The whole crew felt like a family. It hurt like I lost a brother when I lost Dan. The people who wrote Bonanza did something. At the time they admitted it was strange. Hose's death in Dan's story. Cartwright in the plot. This was it's very rare for TV shows not to go into specifics, but the show made it clear that Hose was gone. Years later, in a follow-up series, a show called Bonanza, The Next Generation, someone said that Hose had drowned. As they tried to save someone else's life, it was a wonderful tribute to the type of Dan, always put other people before himself. There was one more season of Bonanza. The energy wasn't the same, though. Had changed by the time the last season ended on January 16, 1973, and it was the fans who missed Holiday the most. The show had lost its heart because of Dan. Dan stayed close to his even after he died. Dan had deep roots in the land he loved. Blocker will be laid to rest in his born and raised in Dalb, Texas, where he was buried. His grave is in Woodman Cemetery in a family plot. Laid to rest in Woodman Cemetery with his family plot. His grave is easy, just a plain ace stone called B. Dan D. Blocker carved on it, not a fancy statue, not aloud, just words like, peace and quiet. How he might have liked it. Next to him 3 members of his family lie in wait. Father, his mother, and his sister. The people who raised him, helped him, and saw him grow into the man he did. The small town of DeKalb might have been a long way away. Hollywood, but it was never far from Dan's heart. Even after he moved, his moving to California to be close to him, the people of O'Donnell will never forget them. The gentle giants in the area still remembered the boy with his nose in a book, the young man who worked in his dad's grocery store, and the student who stood up all the time because of his size and kindness, was proud to see him ride across as Hose Cartwright Dan on their TV screens. He may not have forgotten them either. Owned big homes and worked with stars in Hollywood, but he was still that kind Texas boy that he left behind. A strong sense of family lives on through more than just his work by telling his kids' stories. Now fans still love to hear and see he left behind, and no one else does. Even more than his son Dirk Blocker. Dirk Blocker was born on July 31, 1957. He was the mayor of Los Angeles, California. Youngest son of the famous actor Dan Player, who blocked Hose Cartwright on when Dirk was a kid. He had a special bond with his dad. He would often go see him on set and watch him bring Hose. Those times were very important to life. He saw Dan as more than just a TV star. Dirk saw him as his hero, but being the child of a famous person had himself, Dirk once said, growing up having a famous father took away any wanting to be famous. My pop could hardly go anywhere without being surrounded by fans. He still liked what his dad had done. So, even though fame didn't, Dirk made his case to him by acting. The first time on screen in 1964, he was only a kid when he showed up in a car with his dad. Commercial. It was only a moment, but it put down a seed, and then everything changed when Dan passed away in 1972 of a lung-bruised artery. Dirk was only 14 years old when he afterward said, "It was overwhelming. I did pretty good job of denying the effect. I saw the truth of his death in his. It was too much to pass up, but even with pain inside, Dirk kept moving, making his own way forward." And that was just 2 years after his father died, Dirk made his TV debut. In 1974, he was in an episode of Marcus. After a year, Welby MD was only 16 years old. After the end of high school at Santa, it got better for Monica High. Dirk's career. Speed was one of his first big roles. Acting like Abel McKay can't read or write. Mountain Boy in Little House on the Prairie, the part fit him well. Just Dirk could make things like his father could. It makes the characters seem real and warm. He was in a lot of popular shows over the years. Among these were MASH Walker and Texas Ranger. You know, The X-Files, Doogie Howser, MD, Quantum Leap, Chips, and Murder in Matlock, She Wrote, but it was his first regular part. Arrived Gary Dirk played First Lieutenant Jerry in 1976. Brag on Ba Black Sheep, a comedy about war that ran until 1978. He was only 19 years old at the time. His own on-screen, but Dirk he slowly stayed away from he didn't want fame in the way that others did, but he liked playing supporting roles. And just the right amount of character to stay to play the game without being filmed that made him happy in the end. Dirk would be in 2 TV movies based on Bonanza.